We're going to replace this front door, and I'm going to show you all the little things that need to be done in this particular situation, as well as some things you might run into on other doors. This door is a 32, but the style that the customer liked was a 36. They asked if I could fit it in, and I said absolutely. Important consideration when you want to enlarge the door is what size is the outside trim, so you can see how much of the siding you're going to impact, if you are at all. This door is not very old, but a lot of older ones will have a large oak threshold that comes into the room here. That's what this Sharpie line represents. Now, if you take it out, then this vestibule could be tiled, or the entryway could have hardwood floors. You very much need to consider what you're going to be doing with that before you take it out, because you will need to patch the tile or hardwood floor to make up for that void that you've created. You're probably going to run into stone steps a lot, and they have a large void usually, maybe where the old trim went down and between the house and the sheathing back here, so it's really vulnerable. And when this door is out, I'll show you what we do about that. A lot of times on storm doors and windows, these old screws will just spin out, so instead of using a drill, we're just going to take a cat's paw. That's it. On this particular door, we need to be very careful on how we extract the aluminum, because this aluminum goes up behind that beadboard detail, and if they did it right, this aluminum goes back and curves as a flashing for this vinyl siding. Up top here, where this aluminum goes up behind this detail, I'm going to carefully remove these nails with a fine finish bar, and I'm just going to bend it a little upwards without deforming it too much, so that we can probably salvage it and use it as a drip cap of sorts. Now we've broken the seal on all of our aluminum, and we can hate the guys for making our lives difficult and respect them for doing a really good job. Now we're going to remove the exterior casing so that we can get a good look at what's behind the aluminum. Now we have the aluminum bent back to expose the old trim. Now that we can see it, we will take off the old trim so we can frame the rough opening of our door. We'll leave this aluminum for now, because sometimes you can revitalize it as a sort of flashing around the door if you can. Other than that, we might just cut it back. Okay, we've taken our storm door off, our interior slab door. We've taken the exterior casing off and exposed a build out. The reason they built this out with 2x4s was to match an old depth from siding or a detail or whatever, so that they could do a layover with their vinyl. Now we get to decide where we want to put our door, and we can do interior and exterior extension jambs, or just interior, because I don't recommend exterior extension jambs if you're doing a storm door, because it will affect your ability to hang it. So just something to consider. Remove any screws that you can see that are through the jamb. Storm door closer hardware usually has very hard to access screws up here, so you'll want to have an extension on deck for that. Once you've taken out all your screws, you're going to want to sawzall with a long blade to cut any remaining nails that might be holding the jamb. Remove the long screws from the strike plates before you cut with a sawzall. Now, because this door was built out, they chose to use these single verticals here, which is not a good idea, considering you're basically opening the door for bugs and stuff to just find a home in these voids. Just another example of why very long sawzall blades are necessary to carry. We want to clean out all this junk, because we're going to actually put a large piece of aluminum running straight down here, so that the moisture transfer between this essentially disappears. So just make sure you have a long sawzall blade when you go to do anything. Because we already have siding, the center of this door relies more on the exterior trim as it will land when we finish. So I marked the center, and I will mark out each way, because we're enlarging this opening as we talked about. I'll mark out each way for the rough opening, and the interior is more arbitrary than the exterior, so that way we won't affect the exterior siding or the trim. Now, because we're taking these studs out, it's real easy to take studs out, but it's a lot easier if you break the seal with a bar to a point where you can actually fit your sawzall in and cut all the nails going through the sheathing into the stud. When you're breaking plywood seals, you really want to start at one end and work your way down, sending your bar into each nail. Because if you go between the nails, all you're doing is flexing the plywood, and then when you take it out, it's just going to settle back to where it was. So start at one end, break the seal, and then cut all the nails with the sawzall. Breaking the plywood seal, if you go straight in, don't try to bend the bar out backwards, it's just going to fall out. Actually turn the bar to the side, and you're going to break that nail seal. To create your gap, you can send your blade all the way around. As you cut nails, the plywood's going to repinch your blade. If your progress starts to slow down a lot, that means you're cutting wood, so you want to actually just flex your blade and get away from that wood, or restart your cut. Trouble with a stubborn stud, start at one end obviously, bend it out, feed it with your hammer, and walk your way down. Alright, so I'm going to cut this line all the way up, all the way around. I'm going to leave a little bit left at the bottom because we don't want this flowing around, and I'll show you why I'm doing this at the end of the process. When you're framing the rough opening of the door, you always want to check the threshold for level. Now this is obviously off, so we're going to mark our header height from the high point. Also want to check your existing studs for level, especially the hinge side. This is my hinge side, it looks pretty good, but my other side doesn't look very good. It's actually fairly off, so we want to make sure that we account for that when we do our rough opening. We've installed our full studs, headers, and jacks. We're going to nail off our plywood right here, and then we're going to cut this so that our rough opening is proper. We'll also cut that bottom plate. Use a sawzall or a router with a panel pilot bit to get this plywood out of here. Now that we've framed our rough opening, we should be the same distance off of the siding on each side, and we are because it's 5.5. You might not get so lucky on the header, but here we actually did, so that's really awesome. Now because we have this big void here, I'm going to use 14-inch aluminum. If you're doing a lot of doors or even decks or anything, I highly recommend you buy a roll of this. You're going to get a lot of doors out of one roll, but we're going to sneak it in here. We're going to really eliminate that moisture transfer between here, and that's a big deal. Now you can see the new piece of aluminum goes all the way down to below the sheathing. Now that stops any moisture from transferring. I'll bend this right back. Because this opening was built out the distance of a 2x4 to account for the layover that they did, I'm adding this preliminary pressure treated kick. So I bent my aluminum back, I leveled the kick, which will help me with the door, and I shimmed prior to installing the door rather than after. We have everything shimmed and taped. We're actually going to leave these shims long because when we go to do the flooring, I'll use those to my advantage to kind of drift out in a way that doesn't really exaggerate that this opening is off. When you finally go to install your door, you're often going to run into something like this. You want to just take that off because when you go to install it into your rough opening, it's either going to hit or it's going to be a pain in the butt to get it off afterwards. Done with your preparation, you're going to want to do a dry fit because if something's wrong, then you don't want to have to clean off the silicone below your threshold. Now that we're really ready to install our door, I like to do an inside bead of PL Premium and an outside bead of sealant. That's not a necessary step. You can certainly use the same for both. I just think this really helps so that the threshold will never bounce in the future. Now that we have the door tucked into place from the outside, we're going to come inside and put our level to our hinges to make sure that it's good. This will need a little shimming on my left, so do that and you should be alright. Now even though I'm not going to keep this brick mold, I'm going to use it to my advantage temporarily by tacking it up with the door being level so that I can open the door and then screw it off. All that preparation, shimming the floor and making sure that our hinge side stud is perfect really works to our advantage because now we know if we're tight with our hinges and we're just sitting directly on the floor, everything's going to work out nicely. Sometimes when you see door installations, they have the shims going this way. I like to go up and down. That way I can actually cover both my strike plate and my deadbolt, and I can just send some screws where I know that those screws aren't going to hit. Some long ones, that's just for extra security, and this is a high traffic thing, so you want to make sure that you really secure it. Used a countersink, and we placed 4 3-inch screws in this high traffic area. We offset them towards the center of the jamb so that these don't interfere with the screws that'll be for the strike plate and the deadbolt. Place to countersink some extra screws is behind your weather stripping, so no one will ever see them, but it definitely adds some strength for longevity. Another good place to countersink some screws is right behind your hinge, so they'll be hidden, but they're also adding a lot of strength to a very important area. When you're doing a lot of doors, I highly recommend buying extra packets of these because they're only $1.50 or so, and they come with 3 long screws. So we're going to send those in through each hinge and right into the stud, and that's really going to lock these hinges into place. This is our nice long matching screw into the stud. Now that we have our door all screwed off all the way around, we'll take off this trim, tape it up, and trim it out. Patched our bigger voids with some concrete. Is it the best? No, you could find some slate and put it in, but this is mostly going to be covered by trim in the kick anyway, so it's a very adequate solution. I'll put a bead here before I put my kick on, and this will be more than acceptable. Their original build out didn't get us all the way up. There's still about a 3/16 quarter inch there on this piece, so our header trim's not going to sit flat, so I'm actually going to take a few minutes and cut that away so it sits nice. Now we're all taped off, right up to the trim, all the way around. Now I'll install my trim using biscuits for alignment. Installing your kick, you want to do your best to make sure that you sneak it up so that it holds your threshold nice and solid. You also want to make sure that you keep this scribed, like for example this side is 6.5 and this side is 6 3/16. Scribed it with a 10-degree back cut, and that kept it nice and tight. Now we have the door all trimmed out. You can see where we repurposed this aluminum all the way around as a flashing. I'll cover that now with a piece of trim. And that's what people really mean when they ask if you'd like to earn $10 the hard way.